Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 9th ALMU webinar. Our topic today is how to reduce your power costs and carbon emissions with no capital investment. Our speaker today is Gavin Ada. Gavin is the CEO of Total Solar Distributed Generation. Before we start, I would like to introduce ALMU's new Executive Director, Bernard Wong. Bernard, would you like to say a few words?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is Bernard. Thanks, Vicky. The name is Bernard Wong. Just in case you have not heard of me, I just came on board to ALMU on December the 1st, the new kid in town. And a little bit of my background is that I've been in the petroleum and specialty chemicals industry for the last about 36 years. A lot of time spent on lubricants. Started with Mobil in Singapore for lubricants and fuels, followed by Lubrizol additives. And then I was in BP for 10 years, a lubricator with BP Castrol Lubricants. And then I'm back to Lubrizol for my second tour of duty in 2007, and I retired in 2018. And the last several years, about 10 years, I was the regional Asia Pacific region head for Lubrizol Corporation. Glad to be retired, but things happen for a reason. I met up with Vicky about a year ago in Singapore, and we were talking about this idea of having a new role to push ALMU to the next level. And because of COVID and so on and so forth, finally here I am. Better late than never. So on board on December 1. I look forward to really to collaborate and work with all of you, ALMU members in particular, and also to bring on board more ALMU members so that everybody can benefit from this very interesting and growing lubricants market in Asia Pacific. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bernard, for your introduction. We're really glad to have you on board. We know that we're going to go places with such high-level executive director. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker. Like I mentioned, his name is Gavin Ada. He's the CEO of Total Solar Distributed Generation in Southeast Asia. So Gavin is a pioneer, I would say, in this area. He founded several solar developers in the distributed generation sector. In 2017, he sold his startup company to Total to create Total Solar. He also worked at REC Solar, where he led business development, corporate communications, and investor relations globally. Gavin has an MBA from INSEAD and a master's degree from Cambridge University. Without much ado, I would like to turn over the microphone to Gavin so he can start his presentation. Welcome, Gavin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. I think it's worth mentioning I've been working in the solar space for almost 15 years. And initially, I was focused on doing large solar farms that you see in the news quite a lot in the US, and we did about $1 billion of solar projects. And I saw, this is about 10 years ago, an opportunity that was taking off in the US and hadn't come to Asia yet, and that is to install solar systems like you see in the photo on the roof of facilities. And we looked at buying Tesla, and we looked at doing a lot of different things in the US, and I thought, you know what, I want to come to Asia and I want to launch this industry. So I came here back in 2013, and at that time there really wasn't very much happening in any of the countries in the region. So I've kind of devoted the last 10 years of my life, more or less, to doing these kind of projects. So very, very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you. What I'll talk about today is how you can install solar systems, how Total can install solar systems for you, like the one you see on the screen. It reduces your power costs. In some cases, it can reduce power costs by 50%. and it reduces your carbon emissions at the same time. And we offer a structure which has no upfront investment. So you do not have to buy the solar system. You don't have to pay anything. You just take the electricity out of the solar system at a discount and save money straight away. So I'm going to focus on really on cost reduction rather than carbon emissions. So for those of you who don't know, just a quick introduction on Total. So it's the biggest company in France, one of the biggest companies in Europe, about 100,000 employees around the world, and about 200 billion a year in revenue. And really, I think the important point here is that Total has been owning and operating and developing energy projects for 100 years. This is our core DNA. This is all we do. I think most of you will know that. I think what you probably might not know is that that Total has been a leader in renewables and especially in solar for the last 50 years, and has built the largest solar project in the US. That's up here. That's Solar Star, the top right. That was the biggest project in the world at the time. We've then built several projects in Japan. And the reason I bring up Japan is it's a particularly difficult market because of the typhoons. And the project that you see here is a 27 megawatt project. And actually all of the projects around there, they all got hit by a typhoon. And the only project that survived intact was the Total one. And I think it's that experience from oil and gas that we're now applying into solar. That means that the systems are really very robust, very safe. And then in the bottom right, you see a concentrated solar plant, which was one of the biggest in the Middle East when it was built 7 years ago. So Total has 50 years of experience in solar, and it stayed in solar all the way through. I think there's a lot of other companies that have gone in and then come out and then gone back in. We've been committed to renewables and solar for 50 years, and we've really in the last 5 years ramped up the investment. So in the last 5 years, we've invested about $8 billion into buying companies that enable us to grow better and provide more services to companies. And then also, and one of the companies that they bought was my startup. And then about 7 billion into bigger projects and enabling us to scale. And the world has really, the energy world has just got to this stage now. It's an inflection point where solar is cheaper and cheaper than the grid, cheaper basically than any other form of power, and so you're seeing a lot of growth in demand from customers. Just incidentally, we offer a lot of other services. GreenFlex is energy efficiency, so we can look at your facility and work out how we can optimize and reduce carbon emissions, but also reduce energy losses. And then Saft is one of the biggest battery companies in the world, really focused on grid, so putting batteries onto the grid to help improve the performance. So where Total is a leader in solar, especially, is for commercial and industrial companies, for corporates. So we've deployed $2 billion into projects for industrial and commercial companies. And I put a few logos up on the right, trying to really focus on companies in our region. This eagle, or I'm not exactly sure what type of animal that is actually an emblem for Samarinda Airport. That's an airport in Indonesia. It's the new capital city. It's moving from Jakarta to Samarinda, and that will be the international airport there. And we're solarizing, so we're putting solar on the terminals there in order to cut their costs. I think Chandra Asri is another interesting company that I'll come back to. That's the biggest petrochemical company in Indonesia. This was the first rooftop solar project with our business model done in the country. So we're quite pleased about that. You've got Greenfields, which is the dairy milk company. Really, we can put solar systems on any kind of facility. So if you have a rooftop or you have some ground space, any space whatsoever, solar systems can be installed. Nike has been very aggressive. They have 1 million people working in Vietnam and Indonesia, and they're looking to cover every roof with solar. So that's a very exciting opportunity. Renault Nissan, I'll talk about a little bit later. Microsoft and Apple have huge energy requirements, so they're really desperate to drive costs down. And then Danone is the largest water company in Indonesia, so the largest bottling company. SLNG is the LNG terminal in Singapore, which I'll talk about later. And then Changi Airport recently signed up a project with us where we're solarizing the fuel hydration facility. So this is where the aviation fuel is being provided to all the airplanes that come into Changi Airport, and we're putting a solar system on there. I suppose the point is really we have a business that is completely focused on providing solar for commercial industrial companies, and we're trusted by some of the market leaders in a lot of different industries to provide that power safely and cleanly. So why are people looking at solar? The first thing is it's just cheaper, and quite frankly, that is the driving trend. That's the big reason that people are considering solar in the region, but especially in some of the markets that we're looking at in Southeast Asia. It's also on site, and I think it's interesting to look. This is the Danone bottling facility in Indonesia. They run diesel generators quite frequently because of the grid cutting out. And because they've got the solar system on their roof, that means they need to run the diesel much less. We're cheaper than the cost of the grid in Indonesia. But we're much cheaper than the diesel. So we might be 50-60% cheaper than diesel. And then, of course, there are some green elements here, and we're starting to see more and more pressure around sustainability. So what's happening in electricity prices around the region? I picked 4 countries here, but happy to look at any others. We really split them into 2. On the right-hand side, you've got the more expensive prices right now. So this is a 15 cent per kilowatt hour. You've got a 20-year view. So we're looking at what is the price of power over the last 20 years. Where is it now? So it's currently at 15 cents per kilowatt hour, but also, how has it escalated over time? And so these are local currency, and then here you've got US dollar currencies. And then what the situation is that in Thailand and Singapore, solar can come in and be about 50% cheaper. So from day one, you can pay 50% less, 40 to 50%. It depends on where you are for solar power. And then you've got the markets where the government is subsidizing the grid. The government is taking taxpayers' money and using that to push the cost of power down. So normally, in this case, it's mainly coal. And even in these markets where where the grid is artificially reduced, we're able to provide 10-20% discounts. And then you're seeing very significant escalation. I think the forecast for Indonesia is more like 8, maybe 8.5% for the next 20 years. In all markets, solar is now able to reduce your cost of power. And why is that? Well, basically, over the last 20 years, solar has dropped at about 17% per year. So every year, the cost of solar systems have dropped 17%, which means that we're now cheaper than the grid. And this is with no subsidies, no government support, no kind of special attention. For me, that's the really big, important point, which I think most people aren't aware of, which is that tomorrow we could sign a contract. I'll install a system, or whoever. There's plenty of companies that would look at this and give you a cost saving and a carbon saving, and produce maybe 20% of your power. So how does the business model work? Well, Total provides all of the capital investment to build the system. We provide all of the operational expenses. So if anything goes wrong, if anything breaks, if it needs cleaning, whatever it is, Total takes the responsibility for that. In practice, we own the system, so that the solar system is owned by Total. That system produces electricity, which goes directly into your building. So we're installing the system on your roof. The power is going directly into your facility, not going to the grid. And because you have more power in your building, that means you take less power from the grid, and the solar electricity is cheaper than the grid. So that's how you get your savings. Quite a simple business model. There's a lot of complexity behind that. So how do we choose which site? How do we design the system? How do we get the equipment in and then install it and manage all the commissioning and then maintenance and operation? It's a power plant. It's not a simple, it's not as complicated as a petrochemical facility, but it's still quite a complicated system. And Total has customized and built a team and operations in every country so that we can do that locally. Yeah, I think that's a key point, that you don't really have to do too much. The goal was to get to the stage where you can just leave it to Total and we'll give you everything that you need. So I mentioned these projects before, but just to touch on them briefly. So SLNG is on Jurong Island, which is a massive industrial facility for Singapore, huge refining capabilities. And the Singapore government was pretty excited when they heard about this project, because from their perspective, they wanted to prove that industrial facilities like an LNG terminal can take solar, that there is space, and that someone can do it safely. And I think that's the key element, where because Total's been doing refineries and complex energy projects for the last 100 years, companies are confident that we can build a solar system, and we know how to do it within the normal HSE and security regulations that you would experience in these kind of environments. And so we're talking to SLNG about extending and expanding that project, and the government has asked us to look at a lot of other facilities on that island. This is Renault Nissan in India. This is where they manufacture a lot of their cars. And this is a carport. So we built the carport, and then we put solar on top of the carport. It's designed to protect new cars. And so it's not for employee parking or anything like that. It's to make sure that they can protect the cars that they have. It's one of the biggest carports in India. And what was quite interesting, and it's the same direction that I heard our chairman move in, and it gets to the sustainability commitments. There were a lot of companies, whether that's Total, Renault Nissan, etc., Nike, Apple, Google, many of them, who are saying that they will only work with suppliers who have solar rooftops, and they will make that a mandatory element of their supply chain. And the Renault Nissan chairman, country head, at the inauguration of this project said, I intend to talk to all of my suppliers and all of my partners and require them to have rooftop solar projects. I have to admit, I was a little bit shocked. Then Chandra Asri, this was the first, this is the largest petrochemical plant in Indonesia, and one of the largest in Southeast Asia. It was the first PPA. So remember what I was talking about, we do the CapEx and the OpEx, and then the customer gets the electricity. This was the first in Indonesia with that model. And my team, actually, both at Total and previously, did the first project in Cambodia, first Indonesia, one of the first in Philippines, one of the first in Singapore, and we're hoping to do the first in Japan in the next few months. So we're used to going in and establishing an industry standard for how to operate. And then Better Grow, I just wanted to kind of give you a feel for different types of projects. Better Grow is a 25 megawatt project. That's the biggest industrial, commercial, corporate project in Southeast Asia. And we built that this year in the middle of COVID. I'm quite proud of my team to have been able to do that. So this is 24 different sites built in about 7 months in the middle of COVID. Really a fantastic effort by them to do that. So we don't just sell solar to our customers and our partners. We believe in it and we do it on our own facilities. And we're aiming to do 5,500 facilities around the world. This is in South America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, everywhere. 4,500 of those are these petrol stations. And I have to admit that the petrol station is probably the most difficult solar project you can imagine of. It's quite small. It's only usually 10 or 20 kilowatts. You can see that it has no roof, so you can see the lifting machine here in order to be able to install the solar panel. So very, very complex construction. It's a flammable environment, and if you're doing 4,500 of these small projects all around the world, you can imagine the complexity in program management, in managing all of those projects and installing them safely, cleanly, and quickly. But the goal is to save $50 million a year with these systems. And what I want to do, if I can, is kind of zero in on one particular one. So this is the lubricants plant that was built last year. It's one of the first projects in Tuas, which is an island in Singapore. We're producing about 35% of the power requirements from that solar system. So we've taken from the grid, so 65% of the power is coming from the grid and 35% is coming from this solar system. It's about 30% cheaper than the grid, and that solar system will last about 30 years. The truth is, we don't really know how long these solar systems last. They degrade over time, so the efficiency does reduce a fair bit in the first 5 years, but it seems to kind of plateau at about 75–80%. So that means after 30 years, you've still got a solar system that's producing maybe 20% of your total power requirements, and we give the system to the customer at the end of that contract, so maybe a 20-year contract. At the end of the 20 years, you've got a free system on your roof producing free power. And what I thought would be interesting to do is to kind of look at the process and how does it work? So we spoke to Total Lube, lubricants plant, and we asked them to provide load data. So we needed to understand, when are they using power? What is the pattern, especially on Sundays? Is there still enough power requirements for a significant solar system? And then how much are they paying for power, to understand, can we give them a significant cost saving? And then which areas are available? And this is one of the complex situations with more industrial facilities. Often there's some expansion plans and it's difficult to know which spaces you can use. We then came back and offered an indicative price. So we said, look, we think we could sell you power at X cents per kilowatt hour. If that seems reasonable, then we will go through a technical site visit. And so that technical site visit took about a month. We sent an engineer to go and look at exactly where we're going to connect. Are there any more difficult parts of the facility to consider? We did a cost-benefit analysis, and we need to understand the site ownership. So one of the elements that's important for us is to understand how long does the customer control that rooftop or that facility. Again, because we need the longer-term contracts in order to push down the price of the power. Once we put all of that analysis together, we came back to the customer, to Total Lube, and we said, look, this is actually the price that we can do, after doing the technical study. And we then sent over our power contracts. It's a standard template. It's the same for every customer. We can't actually customize that contract very much. And one of the most important things for us is to confirm access. So how can we get to the system in order to keep it clean and operating efficiently? And then secondly, to approve and agree the design with the facility management team. Contract was signed, and in 150 days we had installed that solar system on the Total Lubricants facility, and we are tracking and monitoring that performance and ensuring that we get the most possible power out of that system. In the interest of transparency, we can only charge for the power that we produce, and every bit of power that we produce is the saving for the customer. So we're aligned to generate as much power as possible. When you buy a system, the problem with buying a system is that usually the installer is looking to reduce the cost of the system so that they can maximize the margin, and they have a one-shot relationship. It's over and they're out. And actually, the complexities around installing a solar system and maximizing the quality, it is not just the installation, but it's also the long-term operation. To give you a little bit of insight into the sort of the specifics of how we build our solar systems and why they're important, and this goes for any system that you might be looking at. We install hard barricades, so you can see that along here. That means that over the 20-year life of the contract and 30 or 40-year life of the system, someone can go up there and clean the panels and look after the solar system and maintain the quality safely. And that's a key element. I think the other unique element about Total is that we install much better cable conduits. So the cables are protected from the heat. That means they have better efficiency. They're also bigger cables, so they have less resistance and perform better. The covering preserves the cables and they last longer. And then under, you have slots to allow drainage. We find that most companies in the industry, they just put the cable directly onto the roof. They don't cover it. There's no conduit. There's no protection. And I think this is one of the reasons that we produce about 15% more power than other people in the market. We use MC4 connectors. So MC4 connectors are the way that you connect one panel to another. And you see a lot of MC4 compatible connectors, which is a small difference. And I think most non-solar people would not know the relevance. But actually, this is a really significant cause for concern, because if you have two different types of connectors, heat can build up. It can melt, fuse together, and actually, in that case, you've got very, very significant fire risk. This part of Singapore, and actually also SLNG, they have a lot of lightning problems, and so we have an alarm that allows us to make sure we get everybody off the roof, and then we have an arrestor recertification to make sure that if there is any lightning nearby, it's being caught and directed away from the building. So actually, I was going to show you a sort of live demo of our monitoring system, but as you would normally expect, if you're doing live demos in a seminar, they have a 95% chance of failing. So I've gone with the simple image. This is in the reception for Total headquarters, and then also in the lubricants facility. We offer this to all our customers, and it tracks daily performance. It shows how much carbon has been reduced, and we have a more sophisticated page that tracks all of the different measurable nodes in that project, whether it's inverters or meters or heat, or all of these different elements, in order to make sure that that system is performing to optimal state. We have a team, an engineering team that's back office looking at all of our projects across the region. So how do you know if this works for you? I'd say, if you have any roof space or ground space or carport, we like 10,000 meters squared, but actually, 5,000 up is usually okay. Power should be an important part of your business, because we can really reduce that by 10, 20%. And then building ownership is important. I think the last point we're starting to see more broadly, so I don't know if I'd see that as a defining characteristic. So I've tried to keep this relatively short and hopefully sweet. This is actually a refinery in France that we've also solarized. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or explore any specific area that you think is interesting.
Thank you, Gavin. For our participants today, you can ask your questions two ways. Number one, you can raise your hand, or number two, you can actually go to the top left of your screen and you'll see a Q&A, and you can type in your questions there if you don't want to raise your questions real time. While we're waiting for questions, Gavin, I have some big questions. I think it's really interesting. We've had, as you mentioned, we've had solar technology for a really long time, and you mentioned Total's been in the business for 50 years. What has changed drastically? Why is solar power now cheaper than grid in a lot of cases? What was the technology game changer for solar?
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's so basically, if you think about the way the memory and your phones and computers and how that has gone down over time, there is that Moore's law in terms of being able to shrink the size of transistors and the size of the memory into smaller and smaller and smaller elements, and that is driving a cost savings in phones and TVs, etc. And that sort of cost saving has also been happening in the solar space, and it's the same. It's polysilicon. It's the same thing that we use for memory. So I think that's one of the big drivers over the last 10 years. That's been really important. It used to be that if a solar system cost, let's call it $100, the whole project cost $100, the module would cost $60 or $70. So if that was reducing at 17% per year, you were actually seeing, maybe a 10-cent reduction on the total cost. Now the module is maybe 20% of the total cost, and that means that actually it's labor, it's steel, it's all of these other elements that are a bigger portion of the total cost of a system. And so I think that's one part. I think the second part is the grid cost is just exploding, and that's population growth. That's more and more people with enough wealth in order to be able to install air conditioning and TVs for the first time. That's also a lot of manufacturing moving from China to Southeast Asia, and then just older grid, older transmission and distribution that really just can't keep up with the growth in population. Jakarta is a really good example, right? There's actually a lot of coal. There's over generation, there's over capacity around the city, but they can't get the cables, the transmission and distribution into the city center. So you're still seeing blackouts in the capital city, and that's not going away anytime soon. I think that the cost of the grid is going to escalate, and we've just hit that inflection point.
You also mentioned a little bit earlier about having to clean up the solar panels and so on. How maintenance intensive are solar panels?
Yeah, so I mean, again, compared to some of the facilities that I'd imagine your members manage, it is not as complicated, right? So there are no moving parts. It's very digital. So you need to clean the panels regularly. You need to check that the structure is built properly. Is still nuts and bolts are tightened from time to time, but it's more about having a sophisticated O&M software and team behind that are tracking hundreds or thousands of different projects in order to be able to see temperature differentials on different modules and things like that. It's this kind of quite digital monitoring software that's required, and obviously PhDs and doctors behind that who are tracking all of that to be able to say, okay, I see a problem coming before it happens. I wouldn't say it's very labor intensive. It's more software and monitoring complexity.
So does that mean this is part of the PPA and solar is actually, I mean, Total Solar is the one that pays for this kinds of maintenance?
Yeah, absolutely. We own the system. So for us, it's about maintaining and operating that system with optimal performance. And I think so. So the first thing is there's no hidden cost. It's a conversation. It's a comment or a statement that I usually have to make several times. You just buy the power. There's no extra hidden cost that comes in later. Quite frankly, we need to be a bit careful about how we manage the operation because we want to make sure that nobody's kind of making changes to that system. But yeah, we own and operate. We do all the monitoring. That's all on our side.
So does that mean if you're an existing facility and you don't have a fit for purpose roof for the solar panel, you would be paying for the new roof as well?
Yeah, so we've had all sorts of roofs. So there's no fit for purpose roof required. We can install on concrete, we can install on clip lock, we can install on normal roof, metal sheets. We find in Southeast Asia that a lot of the roofs that we look at are older. Maybe they need some upgrading, they need some support structures or whatever. And depending on the amount of work that's needed, we include that in our project. So we will do the roof structure work ourselves. If we can.
In your project, especially for corporates, do you find corporates who have excess power wanting to sell to the grid? Is it able to connect to the grid very easily, or it's a little bit more complicated?
Yeah, so that's a good point. And the reason that we're able to do such a big system in Singapore, producing 35% of the building's power, is because Singapore allows a very easy interface between Total Lubricants and the grid. And so any excess power is sold to the grid automatically at a very good price. The same is true in Vietnam. And we're starting to see more and more countries go in that direction. So you're seeing Indonesia and Malaysia offering similar kinds of structures. It really depends on the country. And the system is built, we usually build the system in such a way that we can upgrade if the regulation is not in place at the time. But we build the system normally to provide enough power for that facility and no more. So it really depends on the country.
So you recently signed a contract with two companies in the Philippines. I believe one of them is Mabalacat Solar Philippines and the other one is Sindicatum Renewable Energy. Are these projects to sell to the grid, or are they basically fit for a specific customer only?
Yeah, that's a good point. So actually that's a different division within Total. So it's not the distributed generation. It's not my team. That being said, those systems are run by a friend of mine, and he is selling power to the grid. In the Philippines, we've done about 20 different facilities, including for Gaisano malls. And we've just signed what will be the biggest rooftop in Philippines with JTI. So Philippines is one of the markets that is a very big growth engine for us.
Which brings me to the next question from Bernard, and his point is, a lot of independent lubricant manufacturers are not big MNCs by definition; they're SMEs. So, do you work with SMEs?
Yep, no problem. So I mean, if I dig in a little bit more on that, so in Philippines we're working with cold storage companies. In Cambodia we're working with concrete block manufacturers. So we are very sensitive to credit. So we are taking a 20-year view on the customer, but no problem. It's not just MNCs, definitely not.
Okay. I mean, I guess you didn't have a slide that said all you need is a minimum of 10,000 square meters, right?
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So that slide at the end where I'm saying, okay, it's 10,000 square meters, and let's say, you know, $500,000 or $750,000 dollars worth of energy usage per year. I mean, you know, for us, a small local company that's been around for a long time, that is, you know, family run or something like that, is just fine.
Okay. Some questions here, I think, which we can take offline. You know, they want to know how to reach you if they want to pursue business opportunities with you.
Perfect. Yeah, please feel free to. I mean, I'm happy to share my presentation, and then you've got my email address in the back.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask of Gavin? Because I do have a few myself. Let me ask my question while I'm waiting for others to raise their hand or ask the questions. Singapore. Last year, when I attended one of the, I think it was the Singapore International Energy Week, one of the things that the Minister of Singapore pointed out is the problem with Singapore is really that they really need vertical rather than horizontal solar panels. Is anyone doing some work on that technology where you can put it on the side of buildings?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people looking at that technology. It's quite difficult to install. So you can now install, there are solar panels that exist that are essentially transparent. You can see through them, so it looks like a normal window. They don't generate that much power, was one problem. And I think the second problem is the shading. So they're quite expensive to install, not that great power at the moment. And then, you know, if you're thinking about lots of tall buildings right next to each other, usually you end up with a lot of shading. So interesting at the top of the building, but less interesting elsewhere. And Singapore really has a problem that the rest of the region doesn't, you know. So if I think about Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, like there's space, and many of those buildings are one-story big flat roofs, so they're, you know, really kind of perfect perfect sites for us.
Okay.
Singapore
your systems have storage, is that right?
No. So and that's an important point. So we are building the biggest solar plus storage system in Southeast Asia, in Cambodia. So we are taking about 50 different hotels and stores off this island, off diesel. So it's a 2 megawatt storage system and a 1.2 megawatt solar system. But storage is expensive. And so what we're really doing is second by second, you know, generating power. When we're generating power, then you're taking less power from the grid, and that's how you're getting your saving. But to store power, to store the solar is a lot more expensive.
When do you see the inflection point for storage?
So the solar system that we're installing in Cambodia costs about, I mean, the total cost of solar plus storage is about 17 cents per kilowatt hour. So 17 cents per kilowatt hour for those who are living in Singapore sounds like quite a low price. It's about the same as a residential person pays. I think that storage is dropping at about 25% per year. I think in 3 years from now, you'll start to see it at the sort of 13 to 14 cents per kilowatt hour. I think then you'll start to see it installed very broadly everywhere.
That sounds very promising. Yeah, especially for countries in Southeast Asia where we have a lot of sun.
Yeah,
it definitely seems like a real winner.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's, to be honest, that's why I moved here. So I could see that you know, in the US, when you install a solar system, you're waiting until a gas plant has been turned off, or a coal plant has been turned off, and so you're replacing power. whereas in Southeast Asia, you've just got this massive increase in demand. You've got great solar resources. You've got a lot of islands where it's difficult, the grid will never get there. And so it's really a very easy solution for this market.
So I think the last question I have, Gavin, is having been in this business for a long time, what challenges do you still see for solar power?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is the biggest challenge is awareness. So the biggest issue that we have is that customers still think that solar is expensive and sustainability is expensive. And I have to pay this huge amount of money up front to install a solar system. And I'm just never going to get approval. I'm never going to be able to do that. Why would I do that? It doesn't make any sense. And so the biggest challenge over the last few years has been to get to companies and help them to just believe that what we've got to offer actually makes sense.
Do you also work with your competitors? Like, for example, Total is in the Philippines, but you're competing, of course, with Petron and Shell and so on and so forth. Is there anything that would prohibit you from working with solarizing their gasoline stations?
No. Actually, we've been approached by some of those companies who've asked us to install those solar systems, install solar systems on those gas stations for them. The truth is that the kind of projects that we're doing are really difficult. So if you think about Shell, Exxon, companies like this, they're not really keen on doing smaller solar systems. And so we are working with them on several different projects.
Thank you so much, Gavin.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.